he's got some coming to him.
He punched her in the face. That's what Kaylee's father just revealed. Nearly 2 years after she was murdered in her own bed alongside her best friend. Bryan Kohberger didn't just her, he hit her hard. And that changes everything about how we see this crime. He's the former criminology PhD student accused of 4 students in their sleep. Now, just months before the trial, the truth is bleeding out. Deleted searches, chilling security footage, the girl who saw him, a mountain of evidence the defense can't bury, and a shocking motive that might finally shed light on Bryan Kohberger's disturbing mind. This is the darkest chapter yet in the Idaho 4 murders. March 2022, 8 months before the killings, Bryan Kohberger ordered a Ka-Bar knife from Amazon. That's the exact same military-style blade prosecutors say he used to 4 innocent students. But what he did after the murders is even more chilling. Court documents now reveal that just days after the crime, Kohberger didn't go quiet. He went back online. He searched for the same knife, again, the same sheath, the same gear. Prosecutors believe he was revisiting the murder in his mind, like a twisted victory lap done behind a screen. But that wasn't the only digital trail he left behind. Investigators found evidence that someone on Kohberger's account navigated to Amazon pages showing how to delete account history right after the killings, as if he suddenly realized just how much he'd left behind. And just maybe, he knew they were coming. Kohberger's defense fought hard to keep this evidence out. They claimed anyone could have used his computer, that it proved nothing, that it was circumstantial. The judge disagreed, because that same account that received the Amazon order, it was shipped to his name, his address, and his phone number, and no one else, not a roommate, not a friend, came forward to claim it. If someone else had used that account, the defense could have called them as a witness, but they didn't, because they couldn't. The judge ruled that the deleted search attempts, the Amazon order, and the follow-up browsing all tell a compelling story. A story of premeditation, of control, of a man who wanted to clean his tracks and failed. Prosecutors now say it's one of many patterns in the weeks after the killings. A man trying to appear calm while secretly panicking. While the community mourned and feared, Bryan Kohberger was scrubbing his browser. The defense says it's all coincidence, and the court says otherwise. And the jury, they'll see it all this summer, because the knife, the order, the deletion attempts, they're all coming in, and that's just the beginning. She wasn't supposed to survive. Dylan Mortensen, 21, woke up around 4 a.m. on November 13th, 2022, to strange noises. She thought maybe Kaylee was playing with her dog, maybe someone was being loud after a night out. Normal things. College things. Then she heard Kaylee's voice. There's someone here. Then a thud. Then Xana crying. Then a man's voice said, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Dylan cracked her door. Once, twice. On the 3rd try, she saw him. A tall man in black, mask on, but one detail burned itself into her memory. Bushy eyebrows. Thick, dark, impossible to miss. The only visible part of his face above the mask. He walked right past her, didn't stop, didn't say a word. She froze, closed her door, locked it, and waited. It would be 8 hours before 911 was called. The defense tried to bury her testimony. They claimed Dylan was intoxicated, that her statement was too prejudiced, that jurors might think someone is guilty just because of eyebrows. Let that sink in. A man who stalked the victims, who drove past their house at least 12 times, who was caught on CCTV circling the block at 3:33, 3:38, and 3:40 a.m., whose DNA matched a knife sheath left behind. And they argued the eyebrows were the issue. But the judge wasn't buying it. He ruled that Dylan's account is clear, consistent, and highly relevant. In fact, it's one of the few first-hand accounts of the killer in the house. And her texts from that night, now public, back her up. At 4:20 a.m., she texted Bethany, "No one is answering, I'm freaking out." Bethany replied, "Yeah dude, WTF." Then Dylan described what she saw. He had something over his head and mouth. She was trembling, panicked. and still trying to make sense of what she saw. This isn't a girl making something up. This is trauma in real time. Critics ask why she didn't call sooner, why she didn't run, why she didn't scream. But trauma doesn't follow logic, and the law agrees. Her fear doesn't discredit her memory. It proves that she lived through something she wasn't meant to survive. And now Dylan will take the stand. Her description, her messages, her fear, all of it coming into trial. And all of it points to one man. The killer's car didn't roar in, it crept. In the early morning hours of November 13th, surveillance cameras around King Road picked up something strange. A white Hyundai Elantra circling, again and again. The car didn't stop, it looped around, headlights flickering across sleeping houses. The car stalked the street like a predator, silent, calculated, waiting. That same make and model was traced to Bryan Kohberger, who drives a white Hyundai Elantra registered in Pennsylvania, the exact car that law enforcement was searching for when the case broke open. But the defense didn't want any of this shown in court. They argued the label Suspect Vehicle 1 was unfair, that law enforcement identifying it in court would be unsupported. Just a theory. The judge shut that down too. He ruled the identification of the car is admissible. The video is admissible. The timeline is admissible. Jurors can see what police saw and decide for themselves. Because it wasn't just one sighting, it was over a dozen. And Bryan Kohberger didn't stop getting caught on camera after the murders.
Hello. How you doing? How y'all doing today?
In the weeks following, he was pulled over twice in Indiana while driving cross-country with his father. Body cam footage shows him cool as a cucumber, making excuses about seatbelts and tailgating. But pay attention. He doesn't act like a man afraid of being caught. He acts like a man who thinks he's smarter than the system. When the cops question him, Bryan debates traffic laws, plays it calm like he's in control, like he knows how this works better than they do. But what he didn't know was that he was already being watched. The FBI was tracking him the entire drive home. They just hadn't moved in yet. The prosecution fought to include this traffic stop footage and won, because it shows behavior, attitude, arrogance, and most importantly, it shows a man behind the wheel of that car, the same one that circled the house where 4 people were murdered. This is more than a license plate or a blurry shape. It's a pattern, a man with a routine, a car caught prowling, and a face that never once showed fear. Kohberger wanted to be the one who understood crime. But now, every move he made is being dissected by others. The white Elantra isn't just a car, it's a witness, and it's going to testify louder than words ever could. The knife sheath was the key. Police found it next to the bodies of Kaylee and Maddie, a Ka-Bar military-style sheath, the kind that snaps over the hilt of a blade. Clean except for one thing, a single male DNA sample on the swab. For weeks, it sat there in the lab. Then, over Christmas, agents raided the Kohberger's family trash in Pennsylvania. They tested what they found. A used glove, maybe a tissue. That DNA matched the sheath. The odds of that match happening by chance, practically impossible. Bryan Kohberger's DNA was at the scene, but still the defense tried to fight it. They challenged the very language of the science, tried to block the terms touch DNA and contact DNA, saying they were misleading, that it wasn't clear how the DNA got there. Maybe it was transferred, maybe it wasn't reliable. The judge didn't agree. He ruled that the forensic expert was scientifically qualified and that her testimony can be presented in court. She can explain how DNA behaves, how it lingers, and how it doesn't just magically appear on a knife sheath in a locked bedroom with no connection to anyone else in the house. Still, the judge asked both sides to avoid terminology that could confuse jurors, but the evidence, it stands. And this isn't the first time Kohberger's digital fingerprints aligned with his physical ones. It was his Amazon account that ordered the knife, his browsing history that searched for how to delete it, his phone pinged near the crime scene repeatedly, his car was caught circling the house, and now his DNA sits silently on a sheath left behind, a forgotten detail in a blood-soaked room. One expert said, DNA is like a name badge you didn't mean to wear. Bryan wore his into the house and didn't realize he had left it behind. The defense can argue probability, theory, context, but they can't argue this. The sheath was real, the sample was tested, and the result result came back with only one name: Bryan Kohberger. In court, Bryan Kohberger barely moves. He stares, he blinks slowly. He doesn't react when his charges are read out loud. 4 counts of first-degree murder. No flinching, no emotion, no remorse. To some, he looks cold. To others, robotic. His defense says there's a reason for that.
Bryan Kohberger does live with autism. He's on the spectrum.
In other words, his flat affect, his posture, his gaze are symptoms, not signals of guilt. They ask the judge to consider this during trial, to let expert testimony explain it to the jury, to clarify that just because Kohberger doesn't cry, doesn't tremble, doesn't shake, doesn't mean he's unfeeling. The judge said no. He ruled that allowing expert testimony on Bryan's autism could backfire, that it might make the jury focus more on his behavior, not less, that explaining his expressions could highlight them in ways they hadn't even noticed. So, no expert on the spectrum, no psychological explanation for why he sits so still while the families of the murdered grieve inches away. But behind closed doors, something is happening. The court approved a full mental evaluation of Kohberger, state requested. Defense teams and prosecutors won't be in the room, but they'll be allowed to watch the evaluation afterward through a video feed. Remember, this is a man who studied criminal psychology, who wrote Reddit posts asking criminals how they felt before, during, and after their crimes, who studied the inner mind of people who got away with murder. He didn't just study theory. He researched real criminals, asked them to describe how they coped, how they planned, how they escaped. So now the question becomes, can a man who studied manipulation fake his own mental evaluation? Some experts think yes. Some fear that he may know exactly what to say to appear sane or insane, depending on what benefits him most. It's like giving a lie detector test to someone who teaches lie detection. Kohberger isn't a typical defendant. He knows the language, the cues, and the consequences. And if this mental evaluation is supposed to give insight into his motives, into whether he acted out of delusion or calculation, the results might say more about the justice system than him. Because autism doesn't cause violence, but sometimes people try to use it as a shield, as a way to explain behavior that's better explained by conscience or a lack of one. Another layer of this twisted puzzle is being added to the courtroom. Not just did Bryan Kohberger do it, but was he fully aware of what he was doing? Every minute of that evaluation matters, because come August, it won't just be forensic science on trial. It'll be Bryan Kohberger's mind. The courtroom's about to get personal. The judge has ruled that Bryan Kohberger's family will be allowed to attend his trial, even though they might be called as witnesses for the prosecution. That's right, his own blood could be questioned about what he said or did in the hours and days after the murders. The defense didn't fight it. The court says that their testimonies will be narrow, nothing dramatic or unexpected, and mostly repeat what they've already said in pretrial interviews. But still, imagine sitting just feet away from your son, knowing that you'll take the stand against him. It's not the only twist. A recent closed hearing sparked speculation of a possible plea deal. Was one offered? Was it requested? Nobody's confirming anything, but some believe the defense might quietly be asking for life in prison over the death penalty. Kaylee's family made it clear they don't want that. They don't want him outliving their daughter. And if the state ever does consider a deal, it won't move forward without the blessing of all 4 victims' families. But one thing is clear. The prosecution believes the evidence is overwhelming. As Kaylee's father put it, this isn't someone innocent with just one piece of evidence. There is mountains of it. Steve Goncalves isn't a lawyer. He's a grieving father. And in a new interview, he finally said the one thing we all suspected but hadn't heard confirmed. He punched my daughter in the face. Let that sit with you. This wasn't just a thing. This wasn't clinical. This was rage. Up close, brutal, and personal. Steve said he learned about it from the coroner. Kaylee and Maddie were found in bed together, but Kaylee's injuries suggested more than just a knife.
I'll say he struck my daughter. You know, I'll give that out. He punched her.
He didn't hesitate. His voice cracked, but he didn't pull back. He wanted the whole world to hear it. This wasn't just murder. It was domination, humiliation, and a man trying to show power in the most twisted way possible. Steve's interview pulled back the curtain on more than just the violence. It revealed how the FBI saw this case from day one. They told Steve early on this wasn't someone in Kaylee's circle. This wasn't a domestic dispute. It was something much colder.
Said we wouldn't be surprised if this individual picked this community on purpose.
According to journalist Howard Blum, federal investigators were quietly exploring the idea that Bryan Kohberger may have committed this crime to prove a point, not to get revenge, and not out of jealousy, but to demonstrate his criminal expertise. Think about that. A man who studied killers, who wrote research papers about criminal decision-making, who interviewed ex-cons to understand their emotional states during the act. What if the murders weren't personal at all? What if they were his twisted thesis? Steve Goncalves believes it's possible.
There was I think a Lewis and Clark murder case that was 5 victims, and they never figured out who it was.
Kohberger knew it was possible to get away with murder, and he wanted to do one better than the other case in Idaho. Blum's reporting originally claimed that Kohberger wanted to impress his former professor, Dr. Catherine Ramsland, a woman who once co-authored books with serial killer Dennis Rader, aka the BTK. The theory that he would prove himself as the ultimate student of murder. But Ramsland has since denied it. She said she never had a personal relationship with Kohberger, no emails, no contact. She even called his parents after the arrest out of sympathy, but had no role in his behavior. Still, the idea persists, not because Ramsland inspired him, but because Bryan didn't need inspiration. He was already obsessed. He'd spent years preparing, learning how police investigate, how suspects are caught, how evidence is gathered. He applied for an internship with the Pullman Police Department, offering to help analyze crime data. He asked to assist on real-life cases. He even wrote about hypothetical crime scenes in his school papers. If there's no sign of forced entry, he once wrote, it may be suggested the woman knew her killer. Let that sentence haunt you. Now imagine him creeping through the house at 4 a.m., sliding through an unlocked door, not because he was known, but because he understood how it would look. There were no fingerprints, no forced entry, no blood trail outside. He left one thing behind, a knife sheath with his DNA. That was the mistake, the one piece of evidence that shattered his illusion. But everything else was textbook. The problem is, today there's cameras on every corner and phones in every hand. Committing the perfect crime is nearly impossible.
He thought he could kill people in our state, get away with it. He was far smarter than everyone else around him.
Like a man running a simulation until it caught fire. And that's the heart of this theory. Bryan Kohberger didn't kill because he snapped. He didn't even kill for revenge. He killed because he wanted to see if he could. He wanted to feel it, understand it, control it. Like Ted Bundy posing victims. Like BTK organizing trophies. Kohberger didn't want to be a bystander anymore. He wanted to be the subject. If true, it's one of the most disturbing motives in modern true crime. A man who studied evil so long, he thought he could perfect it, but he didn't. He struck Kaylee in the face, he left DNA on the sheath, and he was seen. He was tracked. And now he'll be judged by 12 strangers, by the families, by history. The Ramsland theory made headlines, but it didn't hold up. The professor herself denied any connection, and there were no emails to suggest otherwise. She hadn't spoken to Bryan since his arrest, and she had no idea what he was planning. But maybe she didn't need to, because Bryan Kohberger didn't need a muse. His obsession was never about any one person. It was about power, control, women, especially women who didn't want him. Let's go back. Bryan grew up awkward, overweight, and relentlessly bullied, often by girls. A classmate testified it started because of his weight. It was mainly by females. That trauma carved deep grooves into his self-worth. It shaped how he saw women, not as people, but as gatekeepers to validation, and worse, as punishers who had humiliated him. Over time, his pain twisted into entitlement. As he lost the weight and gained confidence, something darker settled in. He didn't become secure insecure, he became bitter. One bar owner said Bryan made creepy comments to women, got angry when they ignored him, and once called a bartender a B just for rejecting his attention. In grad school, he taught undergrads, and the pattern continued. Female students reported he spoke over them, acted dismissive, was noticeably colder toward them than toward male students. Nothing illegal, just wrong. Then came the DMs. Kohberger followed both Kaylee and Madison on Instagram. He messaged Kaylee multiple times. Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? Hi. She never replied. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cruel. She just didn't answer, like most women do when an unwanted stranger slides into their inbox. But to Bryan, that silence might have said more than any insult ever could. Rejection. Again, to his fragile ego. It's the one thread that connects every piece of his behavior. The need to be acknowledged, obeyed, and noticed. When women looked through him, he didn't feel invisible. He felt erased, and he hated it. So what does a man like that do when he's training to understand criminal behavior, the access to stalk without raising suspicion, and a sick need to be seen? He creates a moment he can control. A moment where no one can ignore him. A moment where silence won't be rejection, it'll be fear. Where power isn't asked for, it's taken by force with a knife. When Bryan entered that house on King Road, he wasn't just targeting people. He was targeting the dynamic, the imbalance, the pain of 1,000 unanswered highs. Bryan didn't want love anymore. He wanted domination. And now the courtroom will show exactly how far he went to feel it. Let's be clear, jurors aren't here to guess what Bryan Kohberger was feeling. They're here to decide what he did. And the judge has ruled they'll see it all. The Amazon order, the bar knife, the sheath with his DNA, the cell pings placing his phone near the house over a dozen times, the surveillance footage showing his car circling the block, the girl who lived, Dylan, and her memory of a masked man with bushy eyebrows. Even the body cam footage from his Indiana traffic stop is in, where Bryan debated seatbelt laws like he was back in the classroom, where he spoke calmly while the FBI tracked his every move, unaware that his DNA had already tied him to 4 murders. That calm demeanor is key, because in court, he sits still and shows no emotion. The jury won't hear psychiatric excuses for his silence. What they will hear is the sequence of decisions that led to 4 deaths. They'll hear Dylan's voice, they'll read the texts she sent minutes after seeing a masked figure inside the house, and they'll see the patterns, the entitlement, the stalking, the misogyny, the arrogance, the failure to cover his tracks because he believed he was too smart to need to. This isn't just a trial about whether Bryan Kohberger did it. It's about whether a man who studied crime believed he could outwit it and failed. And it's about whether the system, the very system Kohberger tried to beat, will now deliver justice for the 4 lives he tried to erase. Because the jury won't just be looking at evidence. They'll be staring into the face of a man who wanted to master the rules of crime. And they'll be the ones to prove he never did. He studied murder and then he became it. Do you think this was about rejection or something even sicker? Was this an experiment gone evil? And should the death penalty be on the table for someone who planned this down to the last breath? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like if this case shook you, and don't forget, I'll see y'all in the next deep dive. See you soon and stay safe.